Nobody's making decisions to invade us based on a Security Council resolution. No, certainly a valid question. Summary points. Let me do this. I'm just going to go wrap up. Okay, so here we go. Reactors in North America and Europe are not sufficient to fuel a nuclear industry. Okay? We have to expand what our export target is. The stagnant economies and low load growth in those developed countries jeopardize the prospects for nuclear. Sovereignty for P5 countries rests on what? Nuclear power. Why are we a P5 country, David? Because we're an original nuclear power. That's the ticket. Okay? The other countries want that standing. We take it for granted. But nuclear is the anchor point for that standing in the world. Germany had the luxury of doing rollback on nuclear. They're not a P5 power. The UK, I submit, had to go forward with new construction because they are a P5 power. And they have climate goals, but ultimately they could not roll back on nuclear. Now, the nuclear renaissance is continuing in Asia, despite the Fukushima disaster, and the reason is the cities can't function without reliable electricity. That's the #1 driver. Incentives for greenhouse gas savings could aid nuclear, and the benefits of that reduced pollution, like Dr. Akkad was talking about in China, are going to make nuclear more relevant. So the industry's success going forward will be driven by these global alliances, and so the policies must be based on this new reality where U.S. leadership means embracing these kinds of strategic partnerships. We can't go it alone. We're going to have to team with Japan already, South Korea, and ultimately, I submit, India. Even though Russia's eating our lunch. Let's make sure they don't get dinner.
China will get that. Don't worry.
So therein lies the landscape, what's going on in terms of other nations' national strategies, and what our role could be in this export-oriented world that we need to wake up to. Okay? Thanks for your attention.
Questions, members of the authority, and other individuals in the room?
So the issue here is what I call NIMBY, not in my backyard. Every time we talk about nuclear or anything, everybody says, I don't want it I don't mind it somewhere else and deliver electricity.
I'm glad you fed me that question. We've invented a new acronym that we discovered in our research, which is YIMBY. Yes, in my backyard immediately. These are cities and communities that want a reactor tomorrow. These communities, some of them DOE labs, some of them current reactor operating sites, we have 20 sites where we could build reactors tomorrow, have overcome NIMBY. So NIMBY is only a national construct. When you take it down to a regional level, we could build 30 more reactors in YIMBY territory. David may take an exception at North Anna.
I'm not seeing the NIMBY like we saw NIMBY in the 1980s. I mean, you don't see people chaining themselves to the fence of Watts Bar 2 or Vogel or Sienna. In fact, there's a dearth of, I mean, there's just nothing.
They want the jobs and the clean air and the tax base.
Nothing like it.
So for your information, if you don't know, Ohio General Assembly passed a law authorizing MSR. They welcome molten salt reactors in the state. And
YIMBY!
And there's another state, I think it's up in the north, they're also following that route. And Illinois, Washington states are going to push up nuclear energy as a renewable.
Sure.
So we are lagging behind all that.
Yeah.
You didn't mention waste once, I think.
Well, you covered it.
No, the problem is that you present the growth, but you know what's happened in the United States and why it's happened in the United States with that deep curve. And so technology can play a role in turning all of this around. But, and if this country leads in the technology which solves the waste problem, the whole fuel cycle, it's back in on top of everybody.
Sure.
Because it's going to happen everywhere. And that projection is going to run into the same thing elsewhere as we have here. So the real emphasis has to be on solving all the problems, including the waste, in order for this, in Asia to really blossom.
Sure. The short answer is we in the United States have to move to Gen 4.
Gen 4 offers no advantages.
That's what your reactor was talking about.
Pardon?
Your MSR reactor is a Gen 4 reactor.
It's one of those.
Yeah. It's not a reactor, it's a subcritical system.
Okay.
The point is that new technology is going to be the driver here. You're talking about LWRs being deployed everywhere, and that's the future, the only future of reactor technology development. Well, that was developed back in the 70s. It's the old thing. It's all that's here, but there's going to be new technology coming along in this country or elsewhere, and that is going to be the big influence. And if the U.S. gets into that, in Virginia in particular, then it's got a real future. But you've got to do the new thing. You cannot just exist with where you are and then try to accommodate that somehow with existing technology. You've seen the waste problem, and the likelihood that that's going to get solved anytime soon is low. And in this country, and it's going to rise up in importance elsewhere.
Andrew, where were you? You've been communicating this message across the hill and educating, which is something that in the world I think that Colin and I live in, and Regina as well. It's a continuous education.
Yes, it is.
As you've been doing this more recently, what have been some observations you've found in terms of the younger generation and their vision and understanding and openness to nuclear energy?
Well, I'll be brief. This generation of millennials, I have 4 of them, are the most plugged into electricity generation that we've ever had. So they want reliable power, they want clean power because the eco-ethos is stronger in that generation. Enough of them, not all, enough of them embrace nuclear because they understand what it means in terms of clean energy and American leadership. So, again, don't look for 100% consensus. It's not there.
It's never
right. So if you get 60% of them or better, that's enough to move.
And I would state that, you know, I heard your statement, Dr. Owen, about, and I don't want to spend a lot of time on this, about waste, but the other countries throughout the world, for the most part, have solved the high-level waste issue. And most of them have solved the high-level waste issue with technologies that were created in this country. Technologies that we couldn't implement solely for political reasons. It wasn't we didn't have the technical capability, the scientific capability. We didn't have the political drive. We didn't have the mandate. So when you talk about waste, my response is, I know how to treat waste. All I got to do is get some politicians to understand how to treat waste. And there are a lot of ways, and I got the impression that you're anti-MOGs, and I'm not going to get into that discussion with you, but I believe there's a number of different ways that we can support the activities that acknowledge and recognize a spectrum of waste issues to give the confidence to ourselves, to the public, and to our policymakers that there are safe, efficient, effective, and appropriate measures for high-level waste disposal. Because they're being utilized, they're being implemented all over the world. Again, they just can't be implemented here, and shame on us for not being able to do so. And all this hangs together, Dr. Bowman, from your presentation to yours, sir, to all the other things we're doing. In reality, the reason I wanted you to hear this is because you needed to get up to me. I wanted you to hear the perception or perspective of the global impact, but it all grows out of each city, out of each county, out of each region, in our case, out of each state. And so when you recognize who we are and what we're doing in the Commonwealth and what we want to make the Commonwealth to be, we can't ignore how that Commonwealth supports not only the Commonwealth itself, but how it plays within the country of the United States, and what does that mean for the rest of the globe, not to mention the P5 countries. And I say to that, this is why it's so important for us from a policy standpoint, because that's who we are, that's what we are as the authority, is to be looking at mechanisms and processes and policies that support the safe, reliable, available, environmentally friendly delivery of nuclear power, despite all of those people that don't believe it should be done. And I agree with you, the millennials and others, the vast majority of people that are opposed to nuclear are those people that grew up on the myths, that grew up on the "this killed my grandma 3 Mile Island," this kills you, the radiation is too high, you can't. Therein lies our problem. The younger people today are smart, they're trying to pay attention, they want to hear what has to be said. Unfortunately, a great deal of our population doesn't want to hear that anymore. And that age, in a certain time frame, maybe I'll say between 35 and 50, they think they know it. Don't want nuclear, don't need it. It's unsafe. I don't know why it's unsafe, but someone told me it's unsafe, therefore don't try to tell me it is, even though you do this for a living. That is the responsibility we have. In my opinion, we've been great at nuclear engineering. We've developed outrageously efficient and effective and safe technologies, and we've implemented them and we've operated them safely. What we have failed to do is to inform the public and the policymakers and the lawmakers of all the benefits of who we are and what we do. And they go beyond just developing megawatts. And that's what you were talking about. The value of a megawatt or a kilowatt of nuclear is significantly greater from a standpoint of you were just talking about, from the infrastructure, from jobs, from tax base, from reliability, from availability. Now you let people not have electricity, you let a polar vortex occur, or you let them be without electricity, and suddenly they're screaming for it and they don't really care what it comes from. Just like the folks in New England. I'll shut down Vermont Yankee, but I will import all that electricity from the Canadian nuclear plants.
You're right.
So shame on them.
The last thing I would say, Don, is relative to the workforce and the work of this committee, that international alliances among the universities overseas and here are going to be pivotal going forward. Anything we can do to establish deeper links with their students and our students, send more of our students overseas, people are going to be the key to reshaping our strategy.
That's what I have been doing since 2008.
Exactly.
We started the collaboration between UVA and India, but UVA didn't have any nuclear engineering program, it died. So I'm trying to resurrect this.
And we're excited to help you make that happen. We believe those are the kind of things we need to do, which is why, if I could just quickly move on to the next Roman numeral stuff, I want to talk to you about what does this mean to us? What are we seeing? And I just want to go through it briefly. Energy legislation has just been implemented. And what is the impact on the U.S. and what's the impact on Virginia? What did we see? And interestingly enough, there were a lot of different reports, and David knows this better than I do. There was the SPP Clean Power Plan and the full assessment, and then there was the Environmental Protection Agency issued their final Clean Power Plan, right? I mean, we call it 111D aspect of the Clean Air Act. And what did it do? There were some good things. The EPA recognizing the final rule nuclear plants under construction should not be part of the goal-setting calculations. They can count towards compliance after they're operating. But what did they not do? There's no best system of emission reduction. The final rule does not incorporate a carbon abatement value of existing power plants. So if I'm producing a kilowatt from a coal-fired plant that's belching out the nastiest stuff imaginable, that kilowatt's just as valuable in this country as a kilowatt of clean, environmentally friendly energy. And wrong, that cannot be. There has to be a different value system. And the final rule of the EPA notes correctly that existing nuclear generation makes existing CO2 emissions lower, but they don't further it beyond the current levels. So when they say to the states, and I'm going to come to this in a moment, reduce your carbon emissions by 32% by 2030. Now we're not going to tell you how. And oh, by the way, we're not going to support the 62% of the carbon emitting generation that's reduced only by nuclear. How can you take that out of the equation? It's impossible. The math doesn't work, even for a third grader without a calculator. It just doesn't work. And it's the same thing as that we didn't get any activity. The final rule appears to give no credit for license extensions. So our plants were initially licensed under the Atomic Energy Act for 40 years. We extended them from 40 to 60, and many plants have done that, and probably the rest of them will. And we're looking at now what we call subsequent license renewal, going beyond 60 to 80 or to 100, only if it's safe to operate the facilities, only after all the evaluation of all the impacts and all the things that need to be done. We need to have credit for that. We're talking about taking an existing plant that's already been built and leveraging it and operating it longer. So the way we're approaching new nuclear and the way we're approaching current fleet nuclear are totally wrong. this is why, just as you were saying, Andrew, you can stay through all, even though you're hanging out in the doorway, right?
No, yeah, sure.
Okay, well, you're not hanging out there.
This is my dream
advanced
crowd.
getting off.
I'm gonna
You know,
hang
Mary Alice mentioned it about Regina and Colleen and everyone. That's why we're spending so much time on the Hill.